makes it easier. But we very much appreciate you coming out in this in the rainy weather for this great program. Before we have it start the program, though, and we're going to turn over to Pete, who's going to Pete Shortridge is going to give a curator's report about what's going on here at the museum. Shortridge.
Thank you, Mark, and glad to see you all. Very much nice, sort of nice fall day, I guess. You know, I was tired of the 80s and 90s anyhow. I suspect you guys were too. I want to say a few things about what's been going on at the museum, and then I'll start to talk to you about the research I've been doing. This is one of our acquisitions. I didn't put it here, but I thought this was a nice place to at least show it to you. I'm not sure I have the whole story here. Jeff can fill us in. This was in the Kuhn office building, which is now where Willow Boutique is. So it's the first building that's still standing in the row there. And so the Kuhns had remodeled that thing. If you remember, Mrs. Kuhn was a beautician. So the front part of the thing was a beauty parlor. The back part was the insurance office. And this was the door to his office. Somehow or other, when the next remodeling took place, whoever was doing it spray painted black paint all over this thing. And then it ended up with Henry Saubers, who took it home on the idea that he could use it in some kind of remodeling he was doing of his basement. Door didn't fit, apparently, so it stood in his house for a while, and somehow or other it came to Jeff. And Jeff said, I think I can get that black paint off of there without this black paint, since they were two different kinds of paint. And Jeff cleaned it all up, brought it to us, stuck it there, and we'll find it.
Actually, we were unloading it out of Henry's truck and held it up to the light, and you could read the lettering.
And that's how you knew there was
But
one.
Henry told the story, and then the next thing I know, I'm taking the black pen off.
Did a really good job.
So that's kind of a neat thing. Jeff told me he took a little bit of this black paint off when he was taking the other black paint on, so it's touched up a little bit to make it look like it was originally. So that's a pretty nice thing. We have a couple other exhibits that are new that I thought you might want to see on your way out. I put together one on the two tornadoes in town. I always thought it was a shame that we didn't have anything about that. Big one in 1964 that you remember that kind of came over Happy Hill and took out the Anglers Club clubhouse and did big damage to both greenhouses there. And then an even larger one in terms of damage in 1977 that took out the scale it was the veneer plant then, and then the high school, and lots of damage on Country Club Drive and so forth. So that's kind of in the middle of the museum. You might want to check that out on your way out. I told you last time about a music exhibit. Donna's been working on that. He's got it nearly finished, so you might check it out on your way as well. And, did some stuff with the soda pop factory, but that was in the newsletter. And this is one of the most recent things we've gotten, and I think one of the most exotic. This is real, honest-to-God postcards, and they are deerskin, and they are soft, and they were, I found looking it up on the internet, they were legal and very popular from 1903 through 1909, at which point the Post Office Department banned them because the flexibility wouldn't go through their sorting machines, I guess, that they were beginning to implement at the time. But they were sold, they've got real stamps on the things, and they were sold, can you see the holes in it there? They were sold punched like that to encourage people to buy them and to put them together for hangings like this, or to make pillows out of. And this was collected, you can tell by the addressee here, by a woman named Frankie Beeler, who was 20 years old at the time. Frankie Beeler married Leslie Bruce, so Judge Bruce that maybe some of you have heard of. And they lived in the house that was overlooking Kellogg's Lake, just north of the lake. Mrs. Beeler, this woman's mother, was a Kellogg daughter, so all connected to the greenhouses there. So I got to find some way to be able to display this front and back, and I haven't figured that out yet. But you might want to look at that too. That's the most interesting thing. You end up with all kinds of odd challenges in this work that I never anticipated doing. But. Okay, so today, in some ways, a little bit surprised there's anybody here, because who would come to hear a talk about two lakes? It just sounds like the dullest sort of subject one could have, or at least some ordinary kind of subjects. I think it's actually true for most lakes. Somebody sees a demand, somebody builds a dam, you get a lake, and it's kind of the end of the story. And as I looked around at the kind of the four lakes that traditionally are in Pleasant Hill, the Rock Island Lake, Kellogg's Lake, Lake Leonard, and Baldwin Lake, one of them I think is kind of ordinary. And that's the Rock Island Lake that, if you're not familiar with it, it's on 175th Street, the road I call the Union Baptist Cemetery Road. And it's probably the prettiest of the lakes that we have here. Beautiful thing, but it has a rather simple story. The Rock Island Railroad came through here in 1903. They had steam engines and they needed water, and so they contracted, got permission to build it for themselves. That's pretty much all there is there. The other ones, though, the other three lakes, are more complicated and therefore more interesting. And I was going to talk to you only about two of them, but I had to say a few words about the third one. The third one is Kellogg's Lake. And I think I have to say words about that because I grew up next to Kellogg's Lake. I grew up on Harper Street, and Kellogg's Lake was kind of my backyard. And my dad somehow or other did some talk with Jim Wallace, and somehow or other got permission, sort of, for me to be able to hang around down there, even though it was posted. So I was down there a lot. Now, I want you to try to envision Kellogg's Lake for a minute. The dam on Kellogg's Lake is Campbell Street. So when you drive down Campbell Street, Lake Leonard's on the left as you're going out north, and Kellogg's is on the right. But what you don't want to do, if you haven't ever done it, is stop on that dam and look down, especially in the winter when the trees are not in leaf. And that is one big fill there. That's at least 40 feet of dam that is there. And you just imagine how many truckloads of whatever it would take to create that thing. And it becomes kind of an interesting mystery. Why in the world would anybody go to that much trouble? And so I didn't think about it as a kid, but I thought about it as I got older and came back and looked down there and saw this thing. And, another interesting little tidbit about it that I remember hearing as a kid from my father, he said that dam would catch on fire sometimes, and there'd be smoke kind of coming out of the dam face. And then it would stop for a while, and then a couple years later there'd be a little more smoke. And he said that was kind of curious. He never did tell me why, but I think I know the answer now. Well, the key to all this, why you built the thing, turns out to involve this guy, George Kellogg. George Kellogg is the greenhouse guy, started the greenhouse. And he began this greenhouse, and he had great success, and started in the 1880s. And by the time he died in 1908, his greenhouse was, the quote you probably have heard, the largest greenhouse west of the Mississippi.
Under glass.
To me, the biggest thing was he had 14 acres under glass. And just imagine how much that is. There's a pretty good photograph out in the museum you might want to see, but 14 acres under glass is a lot. And then when you think about that figure just a minute, you think, my goodness, that's going to require A, an awful lot of water, and B, an awful lot of coal. I looked it up, found out that he needed 125 rail cars of coal every winter to heat that thing. So, big thing, big lot of water need as well. So, what was he going to do? Well, the water, let me talk to you about that for a minute first. He started out with some wells, pretty soon got too big for his wells. He made a little pond that's still there. If you follow Kellogg Road where it hits Independence, right where the greenhouse was, there's still a little pond that sits down there in that corner. But that didn't do him enough good for very long. And then he decided that the next best thing he could do, and I show this to you on that first map that has Lake Leonard and Kellogg Lake on it that you might want to look. He decided that his next best bet was to tap Big Creek. And so he bought some land on Big Creek that was just almost directly west of his greenhouse. And he built a dam in the 1880s on Big Creek. And I show you the dam there on that little handout. And that backed up some water. And then he built a pipeline. It's, I forget, either 2/3 or 3/4 of a mile of pipeline. And he pumped out of that artificial lake he had created in Big Creek to get his greenhouse. That worked pretty good. His greenhouse got bigger, so he built the dam higher. And as soon as he built the dam higher, he faced a lawsuit because he was flooding farmland upstream. And the farmers didn't like it, and they threatened legal action. And so Kellogg was forced to knock his dam down. You can still find the base, by the way, if you go out there and hike it down. Butch and I hiked up there one time and found the base, so that's kind of neat. Anyhow, so he's out of luck, and he has a water problem. Now, consider a second thing about the coal for a second. He has this need for coal. How do you get coal from the railroad to the greenhouse? Well, the direct way is Camel Street, right? So he'd go out Camel Street. But if you can imagine what Camel Street looked like without that big dam in there, it was a long hill down from Harper Street to the bottom there by the scout cabin, and then a long hill back up. And he thought of a way to kill two birds with one stone. And it's really a marvelous kind of a thing. And had much expense with the coal, but if you build that dam higher, you reduce the grade for the coal trucks. And so you kept building it, and in the process, what had been a dinky little lake became a pretty nice lake. Not huge in terms of area, but pretty deep. And therefore, he solved his water problem, and he eased his coal delivery problem. So, and I think it's kind of a neat story.
What was the dam built up?
Oh, that. Thank you, Mike. Almost like I had you set up there. Part of it was just stuff that he found and did that, but a lot of it was the cinders left over from when you clean out the furnaces, and that's the stuff that was smoking. Yeah. So anyhow, first house we lived in as a kid. My dad didn't have much money. He built the garage, but didn't have enough money to have a driveway. So he got cinders for the driveway. My mother hated him for that, because cinders were dirty, nasty things, and she had to wait for the cinders in order to get in the car. So anyhow, maybe you have cinder stories as well. Now, second lake, Lake Leonard. Talk to you about that. That's an older lake. Kellogg's Lake is, I guess, one last Kellogg thing. He built that dam over several years, but kind of 1902 is the kind of the key year he was doing this, and he tried to get the city to pay for it, say he was improving the road. They wouldn't do that, but they did give him a tax break. So he got $3,000 in tax breaks over the next several years for improving at Campbell Street. So maybe it all worked. Okay, Leonard Lake, 1886, involves another really interesting man in early Pleasantville history. This man's name is Zenas, Z-E-N-A-S Leonard. He is the son of a man also named Zenas Leonard, who was somebody you might want to read about if you are interested in mountain men. He was a Jeremiah Johnson kind of a guy who operated out of Fort Osage up on the Missouri River. Did all this mountain men stuff in the 1830s and 1840s before anything else was going on out west much. And as a result of him being gone all the time, his son, young Zenas, was essentially raised by his uncle, a man named Nathan Harrelson, who had quite a bit of farmland out between Pleasant Hill and Greenwood. So he grew up more or less around here and decided to stay here as an adult. Made a lot of money. The most famous thing he did is an institution that he and some friends founded called the Cass Land and Cattle Company. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that or not. But they secured a bunch of land in New Mexico on the Pecos River, something like 4,000 acres at the end of the free grazing kind of period. And so controlled big acreage out there and made a lot of money out of the virgin prairie, essentially. Anyhow, came back here and was kind of a gentlemanly existence. And then he had this idea. And the idea was that he knew that the Missouri Pacific Railroad, like the Rock Island, they needed water. They had even more traffic than the Rock Island did, any more steam engines, so needed more water. They had been, before the 1880s, of course they were here before the 1880s, but they had relied on wells. But wells were proving to be inadequate. They needed more water. And he hit upon an idea that he thought would work so that he could be the supplier to the Missouri Pacific of the water that they needed. Now, so in order to understand what he did, you have to look at my map there first and look at Lake Leonard, and I have a little dashed line that kind of runs through the middle of Lake Leonard there that you should look at, because that dashed line shows the path of Big Creek as it was before 1886. And I had no idea as I was growing up around there that existed. So Big Creek was essentially in that area a big reverse letter C, like this. The creek exists and it has this big bow in it, then it kind of comes back. And what you might remember is the Anglers Club clubhouse set at the southeast corner of that big bend. Now, this guy Leonard observed that Big Creek was in the process of what creeks and rivers do when they flow across a big area of flat land. They meander, create these big bends, and then every once in a while they cut those bends off. They take a shorter path during a flood, and he observed that Big Creek was just beginning to cut off that big bend. And his idea was, I can take this incipient cut and I can encourage it and I can make some money off of this. So what he did was really kind of outlandish even now. He decided that he would build two big long embankments, each about 20 feet high, one 1,200 feet long, one 800 feet long. The 1,200 feet one cut off the Big Creek where it was beginning, top of that bend, and so blocked off the river there, forced the creek into this incipient new channel that it was about ready to cut. He built straight south this 1,200 feet. Then when he got to the end of that, he built an east-west one, essentially, 800 feet, and that cut off the other end of the creek where it was coming back out of that bend. How did he get and where did he get all of the dirt it took to build two huge embankments like that? He took it out of the creek bed. And so, by taking all of that dirt out of the creek bed, you have enough for your embankments and you create a lake. It's the damnedest thing. Then he decided, because he had a little further idea in his head, he didn't need quite all the dirt, so he left the center part of that dirt unmoved, and that became eventually an island in the middle of the lake. And on my little diagram there, I try to show you a little island that sits there. And that became important to him later, that island. By the way, the island no longer exists. It did when I was in high school in the 60s, but it disappeared at some point just by the erosion of the water in the lake, and it's all part of the mud at the lake bottom now. So, that is the general notion of the idea. So then he, created this new path for the river. He had to build a new bridge over the thing where the new canal, as he called it, emerges. And so if you can imagine yourself going out Boardman Street, turning there, going along the lake, that first bridge you come to, old timers had two different names for it. They called it First Bridge because there's another bridge over Big Creek that I show on the map a little further. That was Second Bridge. Or they both had an alternate name. This first bridge was called Canal Bridge because that's what it was. It was over this new path, this canal of the thing. And the second bridge, they called Kellogg Bridge because that's where Kellogg had his lake, that he was pumping water. So my dad always used Canal Bridge, and I never knew what he meant. I don't know whether he knew the origin of the thing, but this is why that bridge has that name. Okay, so we have this thing that is done, but it is a really unusual lake if you stop and think about it. Because, well, again, the map kind of shows you some of the thing. It is a lake that has very little in the way of water coming into it. There's obviously nothing on the two sides where he built his embankments, and there's nothing on the north, particularly. There's no channels coming in that way. And the only one coming in is the one that kind of comes down through the string of Kellogg's lakes and into that. But that's not very much in terms of being able to feed and sustain a big lake. And this water, you see, not only had to sustain that lake, but it had to sustain Kellogg's lake that was upstream. In fact, there are 3 Kellogg's lakes if you look there. And so all 3 of those lakes had to be full before any water would be available to get to Lake Leonard. Well, that's troublesome in its own right. And then when you add to that he had sold for $10,000 the rights to that water to the Missouri Pacific Railroad. So they were pumping all the water out and not much water was coming in. And you think, my God, this guy Leonard is as dumb as a post. How can you have anything? And so, again, kind of think what you might do and what you could do. And his solution was brilliant, I think. He made a deal, and I'm not sure how much of a deal and how much he just did it, but another dam appears on Big Creek that I show you there on that canal. He backs water up there. He and the railroad together build a pump station, which I can remember as a kid, maybe some of you can, and I show it up there on that map. And he installs a series of pumps. So what happens is the Missouri Pacific Railroad establishes a pipeline right down Lake Street. And from the, whatever many that blocks that is, 5 blocks, 6 blocks, right down Lake Street until you get to the railroad and the big water tank that they had there. Kind of where the War Memorial is where the big water tank was on the railroad. So all this water was coming out, and the deal was that as that water was taken out, you just turned on the pumps and you pumped water out of Big Creek into Lake Leonard. And so the lake is eternal. The lake never changes. You know how many gallons you're pumping out, you pump that many gallons in. The only problem is that Big Creek ever runs out of water, and it never ran that much out of water, apparently. And so this sort of a magical kind of a deal. I mean, it's really kind of interesting because Lake Leonard is not very deep. It was just a dredged out thing. The thing at max was never over 8 feet deep, I don't think. And now, if you imagine 1886 to now, how many decades that is, I suspect that there's probably not much more than 3 foot of water in Lake Leonard. Nobody ever talks about this, but there just can't be because there's just nothing but silt has been going on for that amount of time. Anyhow, that's kind of the story of that in a way, but not really the whole story, because part of this deal and part of the genius of this guy Leonard was not only did he envision this lake that he could create and the money you could make from the railroad by doing it, But the railroad said, all he wants the water, you can have rights to the lake itself and the property around it. And so what he did was to create a resort. And it was apparently a tremendously successful and big resort. I enclose an ad there on the back of that page that talks to some of about it. Pleasant Hill had no city park at the time. Pleasant Hill people craved all of the stuff that you can do on a lake, you know, the boating, the canoeing, the swimming, and all this kind of stuff. He made a little picnic area on this island, and that was a popular thing. He even rented bathing suits at this thing, if you can believe that. I can't quite imagine how that worked. But he rented canoes, and his coup d'etat, in his mind anyhow, was he bought a steam launch, and he named it the Lou Bell after his daughter. And so this steam launch went around all over the lake, taking the bigwigs around out to the island for a picnic and then back and this kind of stuff. And it was just wildly popular. The thing I hadn't realized was the popularity went beyond Pleasant Hill. That ad there, for example, talks about that it is only 4 blocks from the depot or something like that. And so Kansas City was an audience for this thing as well as Pleasant Hill, because it's an interesting time in the late 1880s and up through the turn of the century, in that people had been in cities long enough and that they were getting a little bit antsy. They kind of missed being able to do camping and fishing and hunting and those kind of things, and didn't have that opportunity. And so with the trains, they could come out for weekends a little ways, you know, like 30 miles between here and Kansas City. And this was catering to that as well as to Pleasant Hill people. And it was fantastically successful. The city just absolutely adored this thing. I think the best example of it is what we now call Lake Street. Wasn't called Lake Street before this thing was built, because the lake is after Lake Leonard, when you think about it. It was originally called Miller Street, after the guy that had laid out the town. And so Miller Street became Lake. Well, originally it was called Lake Avenue, and then somehow or other it evolved into Lake Street. Just an admiration, I think, for this great thing that Pleasant Hill had. Now, a little more about it. He operated this thing from the 1880s until 1903. And 1903, Leonard was getting a little bit old, and he decided he didn't really want to do this anymore. Tired of the steam launch, I guess, by that time. And so he offered to sell it to the city for use as a city park. City didn't have any park. A good idea. But the city, in their wisdom, said no. Mark Randall wasn't here yet, so they were sort of change things. But and so, unable to sell it to the city, he sold it to the Missouri Pacific for $20,000. And the Missouri Pacific said, okay. And the Missouri Pacific even continued the resort business for a while until 1908, so 5 years or so after they bought it. And then, it's kind of unclear, but I'm pretty sure it had to do with liability issues. You know, thinking you were going to get sued for somebody drowning, and, you know, there were drownings, as you would expect in this kind of thing. So the Missouri Pacific said, you know, we want this thing, we need it for our water, but this resort stuff, that's just icing on the cake, and we're a big corporate thing, and we don't really need all of that. And so they abruptly, overnight, as from what I can tell in the newspapers, shut it down. Just devastated Pleasant Hill people. They, you know, hadn't voted to make it a city park, but they thought it would sort of continue anyhow, sort of a park for free, you know, that they didn't have to do anything with. But the Missouri Pacific closed down, and instead created what I'm sure most of you remember, which was a private club that was called the Kansas City Anglers Club. Had about 40 members. It allowed a few Pleasant Hill people to belong to it, but it was mostly a Kansas City thing, and they closed the thing down. No trespassing signs went up. The Anglers Club built a very beautiful clubhouse that I show you there in the picture, that was destroyed in the 1964 tornado, by the way. And that's kind of the end of the thing. find interesting a couple of tidbits about it. The Missouri Pacific didn't need the water anymore, once they went to diesels. So they sold it to Missouri Public Service, who operate this big plant here right behind where we're sitting. And they needed a lot of water for its cooling towers. So they bought it and used it for a while. And now it's been sold to a private developer. But again, with 2 or 3 feet of water in it, I'm not sure I want to buy a house on Lake Leonard. I'm not sure how much longer. And also the pumps don't work anymore. So I suspect that we're possibly going to see a mud flat there before too long. Yes, ma'am.
I live on Lake Leonard.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that.
And over by the dam, it's 8 foot deep.
Oh, it
In the
is.
middle, it's about 6. And at the end of my dock, after it rains, maybe 5.
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad to hear. I wonder, I can't imagine how that has come about though. I guess,
Rain?
well, but I bet part of it is the existence of Kellogg's. Because Kellogg's would have to take most of that silt.
Right.
And so you wouldn't flow into Lake Leonard again until you get over the top there. So excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Yes, ma'am.
Did you tell me, I think you told me that Zenas built what is now the Wallace?
Oh, yes, he did. I should have said that. That was Leonard's home. Wallace Funeral Home he named it Lakeview, and that was his retirement home. And it's really quite a nice place. I don't know if you know Marcia. Ask Marcia to go upstairs sometimes, and nobody lives up there now, but she can give you a tour. It's really quite a house. 1911, I think, is when it was built. Okay, that's got one more lake to tell you about. The most recent of the 3, Baldwin Lake. Baldwin Lake is 1917 as opposed to 1886 or 1903 or so. It also has a really interesting story. The Baldwin takes its name from a man named Amos Baldwin, who was a doctor in town, came to Pleasant Hill from Kansas City. Apparently had a few health problems and decided that along with being a doctor, he should live out in the country, and that would build himself up. So he bought the land that Baldwin Lake is on. It's actually a huge piece of land. It's 500 acres, and it goes beyond Baldwin Lake a ways, and it goes east. Country Club Drive is the southern border of this 500 acres, and it goes to Lexington Road, and Lexington Road forms the western border. So if you know the house that is the Brizantine house in our minds, that was the Baldwin house. So that was where he lived, and his land stretched all the way back to Baldwin Lake and beyond. So he had this big piece of land. Through the back part of it flowed a stream that's called Duncan's Branch. Duncan's Branch flows south. It is eventually a tributary to Big Creek. It's not a big stream. If you go out Country Club Drive, about where just beyond the old golf course where you go down there a little bit, and then you go back up, but it's not real down and real up. So it's a fairly small creek, but it is a creek. And there was a place just upstream from Country Club Drive where the river banks came fairly close to one another. So a pretty easy place to put a dam and would dam up a big area. Not very deep, but a big area. Now, Baldwin had this land. He had no particular interest in building a lake because, he was a doctor and he had some dairy cows. He was busy and happy and everything. But he kept getting urgings from the city because the city needed a water source. They had been getting their water from wells. Their wells also were inadequate, and the city would very much like to have a city lake. They couldn't use the other lakes. Rock Island Lake was Rock Island Railroad, Leonard was Missouri Pacific, and Kellogg's was the greenhouse, so they couldn't use the existing ones. Sure like a new lake. City didn't have any money, so that didn't work out, but they had this demand. So what you need to have something like this materialize is still another partner, and another partner here is a man named L.K. Green. Lemuel, forgot what the K stood for, Green. Now, Green is a name that is another famous name in Pleasant Hill legacy. the Greens came here in 1916 and bought a fledgling electric power plant that existed in town here, and observed that none of the towns around here had electric power as yet. And if they would build a reasonable sized power plant in Pleasant Hill, they could sell power not only to Pleasant Hill, but to Harrisonville and other towns around here and get big. And they did. And the Green Power Company became Missouri Public Service, which was really big, and then is still in existence and has gone on to bigger mergers and bigger still. Anyhow, by the way, Donna will remind me if I don't say this, Mr. Green built a big house, and his big house is the other funeral home. so the both of them come about. Now, Green built this big power plant right behind us here, and he needed water for his cooling tower. And so Green listened to the city, knew about Baldwin, and so made a proposal. And he said, I got some money here. I need some water. I'll build you this dam. And if you allow me to build this dam and take water from it from my power plant for 30 years, I'll maintain the dam. And I can do this if the city will agree to buy water from me. And so the city said, oh my God, yes, we need the water and we got enough money to buy it on a monthly basis. And so Green said, I've got a deal here. All they had to do was to convince Baldwin, and that was pretty easy too, because they said, we'll build the dam. We got all this money from the city water and water for Green, and you can have rights to the shore of the lake and the lake itself to do whatever you want to. So Baldwin got himself a nice lake for free. And so that's how the thing starts. Very complicated three-way deal here. Now, what happens now is essentially a rebirth of this Lake Leonard idea of a wonderful place for the town. Swimming opens up again. I don't think they had a motor launch, but they had all the rest of the paraphernalia. And I put an ad there in the sheet that was actually from my grandfather's drugstore. So they were into selling bathing suits and golf sticks for part of the thing that they were making out there. A very good deal, and that's the way it worked in the late teens and the very early 20s, sort of another playground for Pleasant Hill. Now, that went on, say, about 3 or 4 years. Then something happened again. And the something happened, it's not explained real well in the newspapers of the time, but I think it clearly had to do with money. Somebody told Baldwin, I think, that this thing can be monetized much more than just selling day passes to Pleasant Hill people to go swimming on the thing. And the idea was that the Kansas City people, again, are going to be interested in this. They've got now, urban people were getting vacations and getting paid for their vacations. And they also still wanted this rural experience. The trains would bring them down here. There was talk of making a spur line out to Baldwin Lake, just like earlier there'd been talk about making a spur line out to Lake Leonard. And so Baldwin said, I think I can make more money here. I'm not going to deny Pleasant Hill people a chance to come out here, but I think if I do some surveying here and lay out a bunch of lots along this lake for cottages, I can rent this land out for people either to camp on or to build cabins on. And I can give long-term leases for these cabins. And so he did it. 107 lots that you can see there on the first map of Baldwin Lake. It was open to Pleasant Hill people, but most of his advertising was to folks in Kansas City. Interesting to me, for a little context, at the same time he was doing this, there were 2 other lakes in this area that were being created for the same purpose, sort of recreation cabins for Kansas City people. One was Lake Tapawingo, that you might know about in Blue Springs, and the other was Lake Lotawana. And so I think it speaks to the idea that this was not a harebrained scheme. This was something that was going on all over the country, and this is just the west side of Kansas City's, or east side of Kansas City's version of this, and it was going on kind of everywhere. So it worked out well. There was, after a couple of years, there was 25 cabins. Then a couple more years, there was 50 cabins. They topped out something like 85 cabins on these 107 lots. Some people had double lots and this kind of stuff. And so he had this income. You could still have people come out and swim in the daytime. He borrowed some money. He borrowed $25,000 to make it even better. And the main thing he did with that was to create a golf course. So the first golf course in Pleasant Hill existed just east of the lake. And Fritz Shoemaker back there, my brother-in-law, tells me when he was little, he was messing around out there and there was still a fair number of golf balls to be found, right? So this is not the golf course you and I remember. This was a golf course that existed by Baldwin for about 3 or 4 years in the early 1920s. He eventually, as I'm leading up to, he goes broke. And somebody else builds, a guy named Bert Holman builds the golf course that you and I remember. So anyhow, Baldwin borrowed this money, tried to make it into an even fancier thing, overextended himself, and ended up closing that golf course that he had just started. He ended up selling the lots that he had been leasing, and the owners organized themselves into a separate entity. I don't know whether you observed that or not, but there is a place just out there that's called Baldwin Park. And Baldwin Park is not Pleasant Hill. It is its own entity, and that's how it got started, I guess, back in this time. Now, something that I knew nothing about until I got into this thing. I got into this because my wife grew up at Baldwin Lake, and she got curious, which got me curious, and so Baldwin Lake, after he sold these lots in 1926, is kind of when this thing happened, when he got himself overextended. A whole separate colony of people existed out there. And they were not the richest people in Kansas City, but they were definitely very upper middle class people in Kansas City who had enough money that they could invest in weekend cabins and that kind of stuff. I tried to hunt all those people down. I think the only name that you guys would recognize is a big-time florist out of Kansas City named A.D. Moore. And later, he ends up buying the greenhouse here, and the Mandas kept the A.D. Moore name even after they owned the thing. So he was there. A couple of the names, just to give you a sense of it. A man named George Husser was there, who was longtime head of the Kansas City Better Business Bureau. So it's people of that ilk. Several fairly big manufacturers. A guy named Julius Bachman, who was the manager of the Kansas City branch of Anheuser-Busch down in the East Bottoms, if you ever heard about that. 2 of the biggest architects in Kansas City had cabins out there. A woman by the name of Laura Smith, who was the founder of the Kansas City Rose Society and the person who put together the big rose garden that's in Luce Park. That's a major feature of the Kansas City scene and has been for a long time. I enclose a drawing of one of the cabins there, and that's the cabin of an artist by the name of George Millett. And George Millett is from what I read, the most famous Missouri artist of the time. Second only to Thomas Hart Benton in terms of the history of Missouri artists. And so that's his painting of his cabin. The only local person that had a cabin there was Baldwin himself, although later Dr. Brownfield of the funeral home ended up building himself a cabin out there for a few years in the early 1950s. So that's what was set up. It was this world apart. Pleasant Hill people knew almost nothing about it. These people just came down and left and didn't get their names in the Pleasant Hill paper or anything like that, as far as I could tell, with very few exceptions. Then came the Great Depression. And the Great Depression, of course, knocked a hole in all this kind of thing. They could hang on for a while. But the big thing as far as Baldwin Lake was not only the Depression, but the fact that the Depression in the 1930s came with a big drought. And all kinds of problems with the drought. I think the drought was, as big an issue for a lot of folks as the economic depression itself was. And what happened with that is that the drought exposed a big flaw in Baldwin Lake, in that it wasn't very deep at all. It was huge. It was like 100 acres, which was more than the acreage of all the other three lakes combined, but it was really shallow. And the land above it was farm country, and there was a lot of silt in the Baldwin Lake. And during this depression, and a couple of dam failures in there as well, but what it was shown is that the lake was getting shallower and shallower, especially because the city was pumping water out of it. This was the city lake, in addition to everything else. So that just meant that mud flats appeared, and that meant that these Kansas City people, already a little stressed with the economic depression, said to hell with it, and they began to leave big time as the 1930s went on. Now, Baldwin went bankrupt at this time, and so his solution to this was, I think I'll offer this to the city of Pleasant Hill. So again, Mark, wish you were there at the time. They offered to sell it for $25,000 for 500 acres. Really a pretty good deal, even at that time, for the thing. Plus, there was a WPA project that had been approved to build a second reservoir, and that map shows you a second reservoir above Baldwin Lake. So they were going to fix the water problem by building the second thing. It was going to be done for free with WPA money. All you had to do was to have a voter approval to get this thing done. Had the election, it got a pretty good majority, but did not quite get the 2/3 majority that was needed for this thing, and so the thing failed. Now, the second map I have there shows you not only the reservoir, but it shows you the plans that were in place in the 1930s for a city park. We didn't make Lake Leonard a city park. This was a second chance, and we turned it down too, but they had places there, as you can see, even for an airport, they were going to build, and housing to the north, and playgrounds, and all the kinds of stuff. So that I thought was quite an interesting thing. I noted in the newspapers my grandfather was a leader trying to get the bond issue passed, but he must not have been all that persuasive because it did not do it. Well, that leads me to the last really point I have, is that the world changed again as the Depression begins to ease up, and as the city votes down the WPA money. Actually, one other little point. That was the only WPA project that Pleasant Hill submitted. I don't know whether you've ever gotten interested in WPA, but all kinds of public works things were built all across the country. Beautiful rock work all around by the WPA. Pleasant Hill got nothing. And they got nothing because this was their project, and they were going to build not only the reservoir, but we're going to build the park, essentially. And when we turned it down in the vote, there wasn't enough time. The WPA had said, we're not taking any new proposals here. So Pleasant Hill got no WPA money at all. I think one of the few places that didn't get WPA money, actually. So what happened after that is a story you may well know. Yes, Keith?
How'd they get the water from Baldwin Lake down there to the power plant?
He built a pipeline. I don't know exactly the path.
Come around the south side, maybe in gravity?
I'm sure it came out of the south side, and I would assume it came right along Country Club Drive somehow or other, but I don't know the exact path. I never have seen a map of the thing. Well, bit of a mystery there. What happens is kind of what you might expect. You had all these cabins out there. You had the Kansas City people abandon it, and then you had a bunch of people from Pleasant Hill coming back from World War II and wanting to start life afresh, not having a whole lot of money, and finding these cabins to be great. And it includes Butch and Donna Shoemaker's parents. They were in that boat. They had enough money to buy one of these, and so they bought it. They lived in it for a while. They improve it. Had a bathroom. These things didn't have bathrooms. Then you screen in the porch and you make that into a living room. Then you add, and some of these got to be quite elaborate. And it was really a great thing for the town. It was a place that just was full of kids. They tell me about riding the school bus and all these people that I knew. I didn't know lived at Baldwin Lake, but all the Helmers lived out there. The Childresses lived out there. The list is really quite a long list. You know, there's 107 lots and 80 or so cabins there. I don't know whether any of you ever heard of Dr. Murray, but he's probably the most famous person out there. He didn't intend to be out there, I don't think, at least initially. He was married to Mrs. Murray, the school teacher that some of you remember, if you're as old as I am anyhow. And they got a divorce. I never knew that, but they got a divorce. And he started running around with his secretary, who was named Joe Reagan, and she was a young entrepreneur who was out there in a cabin by herself. And after the divorce, Doc moves out there, and so the East Road of Baldwin Lake to this day is called Murray Road, after the most famous person to live on the east side of Baldwin Lake, I suppose. The Foote family lives on the west side, and they were a long-lived family over there, Merle Foote. And for some reason or other, I can see why they named the West Road after the Merle Foote family, but for some reason or other, they didn't name it Foote Road. It's called Merle Road, so they named it after his first name, and there must be a story there, but I don't know what it is. So this change occurred mostly in the 1940s, this changeover, and the place thrived in the 40s and the 50s, and then in the 60s, things began to change again. And you all, I think, can understand what happened then. People began to demand a little more out of life. Everybody had a little more money. Central air conditioning, double car garages, all that kind of stuff, and these places suddenly looked small. People moved out. The places went from owner-occupied to rental properties, gradually went downhill. Things kind of went gradually worse and then a little more worse, and finally the dam broke in 1988, and they looked at it, and the dam lake was almost totally filled up, and they decided that we could fix the dam, but we'd have to haul out so much silt that nobody could afford to do this. And so today, there is no Baldwin Lake. And last time I was out there, they were harvesting hay on the thing. And it's a rather sad place today. I don't know how much I should say about today. But I've heard many people tell me that it is now Pleasant Hill's drug capital. And part of the reason they tell me, which I find kind of interesting looking back on the thing, is that because it is Baldwin Park. It is not Pleasant Hill, and therefore it's kind of like, you know, operating on the Mexico-U.S. border. You can kind of slip one way and the other way, so it's a bit of a scary place out there today. But so I'm sorry about that, but I don't know any happy ending to this. That's kind of, you know, you can understand why we built the city lake now. We had all this experience with all these other lakes, and I think 1947 that came on board, the new lake, and so things changed. Story. Hey, if you got questions, I'd be happy to talk to you about them. Anybody have anything?
Pete did such a good job, and I'm sure there's probably little bits that he didn't put in. There are a couple books over here that Pete has wrote that has some information about.
Yeah, there's one about Baldwin Lake and there's one about Lake Leonard, if anybody wants to
if you
know.
want any additional. So, thanks all for coming.
So what about the lake we have now? When did that come?
47.
47?
Yeah.
Okay. Did that already exist, or was that created?
No, that was created just for this. The joke is that it's on Wilson Branch of Big Creek, and Terry takes credit for that. But I think it's other Wilson. I don't know which Wilson it is. I don't believe the Wilsons were around. It's a better spot it's all wooded around there, so it hasn't silted up nearly as fast. Although there has been some silting. I was talking to my friend Joe Hamilton that his brother died out there not too long ago. Some of you may remember Mike. And Joe's opinion was that Mike was in the only place where he couldn't have stood up and saved himself. He was in the old channel. So, yeah, Mike.
Jim Alexander went out a few years from, was it Devon? Finder, and he said the deepest part he could find was 12 feet.
12 feet there.
In our lake now?
It looks like Lake Leonard's gonna have live us all, I guess. In this particular arrangement. Other things on your mind? All right. Thank you for coming. Very much appreciated. Enjoy.